Everyone talks about the HEMI, but beneath the spotlight, a few 70s Camaros were quietly faster, lighter, sharper, and tuned to hunt on the street and strip. These aren't just fast Chevys. They're misunderstood assassins that left Mopar giants stunned at the light. Forget what the brochures told you. The fastest Camaros of the 1970s didn't always wear the biggest badges. Some came from backdoor deals, others from underrated spec sheets, and a few wore stripes as loud as their exhaust notes. Today we're digging up the top 10 factory-built Camaros that outran legends, yes, even the almighty HEMIs, and explaining why they deserve a new chapter in muscle car history. Top 1, 1973 Camaro Baldwin-Motion Phase III 454. By 1973, the muscle car era was gasping its last breath. Insurance premiums were suffocating power, emissions regs were strangling performance, and most factory Camaros were getting slower. But in the shadows of Long Island, Baldwin-Motion had one final act of rebellion. They didn't just defy the system, they built a Camaro that outran legend. Enter the Phase III 454 Camaro. A collaboration between Baldwin Chevrolet and Motion Performance, this beast didn't roll off the GM line as a monster. It was transformed post-tintal into something the factory could never approve. The heart? A 454 cubic inch LS6 V8, dyno-tuned to an advertised 500 horsepower, though real output often exceeded that. The car featured a fiberglass L78 style hood, hooker headers, custom traction bars, a modified turbo 400 transmission, and massive rear tires. Interior touches were minimal, just essential gauges and a roll bar if requested. 0 to 60, easily under 5 seconds. Quarter mile, low 11S, even high 10S with slicks. It wasn't just fast for 1973, it was faster than most HEMIs ever were. But here's the catch. Each Phase III car came with a written guarantee from Joel Rosen. If it didn't run 11S, you'd get your money back. That's how confident they were. Only a handful of Phase III 73 Camaros were built, as stricter EPA rules and pressure from GM made them near illegal creations. Today, surviving examples are unicorns, often fetching over $400,000 at auction. Each one is a custom-built outlaw, a symbol of raw power unchained by Detroit's regulations. But if Baldwin-Motion built monsters in secret, imagine what Chevy unleashed from the factory when it dared to drop a ZL1 spec 427 into a base Camaro shell. Top 2, in 1969, Camaro COPO ZL1. It looked like any other plain Jane Camaro, no stripes, no badging, nothing to warn you. But under the hood lurked a factory freak so potent, even the HEMI crowd whispered its name with respect. The 1969 COPO ZL1 wasn't built to impress. It was built to intimidate. Born from Chevrolet's COPO, Central Office Production Order loophole, the ZL1 Camaro was never meant for mass appeal. It was a homologation weapon, built to dominate NHRA superstock. Only 69 units were produced, each equipped with the all-aluminum 427 cubic inch ZL1 V8. Originally developed for Can-Am racing, the ZL1 weighed 100 pounds less than a cast-iron 396, and punched out a factory-rated 430 horsepower, though dyno tests revealed figures north of 500. Mated to either a Muncie 4-speed or turbo 404.1 gears, this Camaro could crush the quarter mile in the low 11S with minimal tuning, 0 to 60, around 4 to 4.3 seconds. Brutal for a stock car in 1969. The catch? The ZL1 option added over $4,000, nearly doubling the price of a base Camaro. Dealers couldn't move them. Some were repurposed for drag strips, others sat on lots or were swapped with lesser engines. Today, original powertrain matching ZL1S are rarer than most HEMIs ever built. In collector circles, a true ZL1 is a 7-figure unicorn, one sold for over $1 million at Barrett-Jackson. The irony? A car once rejected by buyers is now the ultimate Camaro. But while the ZL1 rewrote the rulebook, the next Camaro didn't need tricks or racing loopholes, just one brutal big block and a badge that read L78. Top 3, 1970 Camaro SS3 96 L78. The second-gen Camaro debuted with smoother curves and sleeker lines. But lurking inside was one of the most underrated monsters of the muscle car era. It didn't have Z28 stripes or COPO credentials, but the 396 L78 SS, it could run neck and neck with the big boys and bite harder than most expected. In 1970, the SS396 package included several big block options, but only the L78 stood at the top of the food chain. This 402 cubic inch V8, still badged 396, churned out a conservative 375 horsepower and 415 pound-feet of torque. Real-world tests hinted it made closer to 425 horses. Mated to a close ratio Muncie M21 or M22 rock crusher and backed by a 12-bolt rear with 4.1 gears, this Camaro was a torque-hungry brute. 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, quarter-mile in the high 12S, faster than most production Mopars of the same year. Outside, it played the sleeper role. Subtle SS badging, raised hood bulge, and a menacing exhaust note that gave the only warning you'd need. Here's the twist. GM only built 600 to 1,100 of these L78-powered Camaros before the engine was discontinued midway through 1970 due to tightening emissions regulations. That made it a one-year-only option and incredibly hard to find. Today, L78 Camaros have surged in value, especially with matching numbers drivetrains. They're less publicized than COPOs or ZL1S, but in performance and rarity, they punch way above their weight class. But while the L78 flexed its raw V8 torque, the next Camaro hit the streets with a racing pedigree and a high-revving LT1 built to scream past red lines. Top 4, 1972, Camaro Z28, LT1. By 1972, the muscle car market was under attack, from insurance companies, emissions mandates, and a public growing weary of gas-guzzling power. But Chevy still had one bullet left in the chamber, the LT1 Z28. It was loud, high-strung, and almost forgotten, but it could still outrun your buddy's HEMI on the right road. The 72 Z28 came equipped with the legendary 350 cubic inch LT1 V8, a solid lifter, small block pulled straight from Trans Am racing playbooks. Rated at 255 horsepower, thanks to new net horsepower ratings, it was essentially the same beast as the 70 LT1, making over 360 gross horsepower in reality. With an 11:1 compression ratio, Holley 780 CFM carb, aluminum intake, and forged internals, it screamed to a 6,000 RPM redline with ease. Paired with a 4-speed Muncie and 3.73 posi rear, the car could hit 0 to 60 in around 6 seconds and run the quarter in 14.2 emissions-era car. Outside, the 72 Z28 was more subtle than its predecessors, but still wore rally stripes, split bumpers, and a wide, aggressive stance. 1972 marked the final year for the solid lifter LT1 Z28. It was also the year GM production was interrupted by a 174-day UAW strike, slashing output to just 2,575 units. Many were lost in shipping or misbadged, making genuine survivors incredibly rare. This was the swan song of the high-compression, high-revving small-block Camaro. Collectors now scrambled to find originals, often paying north of $75,000 for pristine examples. But if the 72 Z28 was refined aggression, the next Camaro was raw, unfiltered LT1 Fury. Unleashed a year earlier and even harder to tame. Top 5, 1971 Camaro Z28, LT1. 1971 was the year the walls started closing in on muscle cars, but the Z28 wasn't ready to go quietly. With its high-strung LT1 engine and track-ready attitude, it wasn't built to cruise, it was built to chase, to scream, to survive the storm, and sometimes to win. The 71 Z28 retained the heart of the 1970 version, a 350 cubic inch LT1 V8 with solid lifters, a Holley 780 CFM carb, aluminum intake, and forged internals. But compression dropped from 11.1 to 10.3.1 due to unleaded fuel mandates. Still, it packed a serious punch, officially rated at 330 horsepower, gross, but easily capable of high 300s in tuned form. Paired with a Muncie 4-speed and 3.731 posi-traction rear axle, the LT1 Z28 hit 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds and quarter miles in the low 14s. It sounded like a Trans Am car on the street and revved like one too. Loud, raw, unapologetic. Visually, it wore minimal chrome, body-colored bumpers, blacked-out grille, and bold rally stripes. Inside, just enough gauges to tell you the engine was alive and trying to kill you. Despite its racing spirit, only 4,862 Z28s were built in 1971. Insurance costs were rising, buyers were softening, and GM was quietly preparing to retire the LT1. This was the last Z28 that still felt like a track weapon from the factory. Today, it's one of the most undervalued Z28s in the Camaro bloodline. But collectors are catching on, especially when they hear that solid lifter wail. But while the 71 Z28 danced with precision, the next Camaro dropped finesse and went full brute force, stuffing iron and fury into a compact F-body shell. Top 6, 1970 Camaro Z28. LT1. The first year of the second-gen Camaro didn't just bring a new shape, it brought a new purpose. The 1970 Z28 wasn't a boulevard bruiser, it was a road course assassin powered by one of the most vicious small blocks Chevy ever built, the LT1. Under the hood of the 70 Z28 lived the 350 cubic inch LT1, a high-revving, solid lifter beast pulled straight from Seca's Trans Am blueprints. Rated at 360 horsepower and 380 pound-feet of torque, gross, it featured a forged steel crank, big valve heads, an aluminum intake, and a massive Holley 780 CFM car. Matched to a Muncie M22 rock crusher and 3.73 positraction rear, the Z28 could scream to 6,000 RPM and hit 60 miles per hour in just 5.8 seconds. With quarter-mile runs in the mid-14s, its handling was equally serious thanks to F41 suspension, front and rear sway bars, and stiffer springs. The exterior wore subtle stripes, split bumpers, and a low-slung stance. Inside, the cockpit was all business, round gauges, no frills. Despite its performance chops, the 70 Z28 was overshadowed by big block SS cars and insurance hikes. Just 8,733 units were sold. Most buyers opted for more torque and less revs. But among racers and collectors, the 70 LT1 Z28 has become a cult icon. Its raw, analog feel and track-bred DNA make it one of the most balanced Camaros ever made. But if the LT1 was precise chaos, the next Camaro ditched complexity for brutal simplicity, reviving the Z28 badge after a 3-year slumber and aiming it squarely at the disco era. Top 7, 1977 Camaro Z28. The Z28 was dead by 1975, or so people thought. Then came 1977, a year of disco, emission strangulation, and detuned V8s. But against all odds, Chevy brought the Z28 back from the grave and gave it just enough edge to surprise the doubters. The 1977 Camaro Z28 didn't come with a high-compression LT1 or solid lifters. Instead, it packed a 350 cubic inch small block, making 185 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque, hardly headline-worthy compared to early 70s legends. But it wasn't about brute force. It was about momentum. Paired with a 4-speed manual or TH350 automatic and 3.42 rear gears, it could run 0 to 60 in around 7.5 seconds. Respectable for a time when most performance cars were pushing out under 150 horses. It came with special suspension tuning, a bold front chin spoiler, body-colored wheels, and blackout grille. Z28 graphics were big, unapologetic, and loud, just like the car's intentions. It wanted to look fast, and by mid-70s standards, it was fast again. Originally planned for a 1978 comeback, the Z28 was rushed into production mid-1977 due to skyrocketing Pontiac Trans Am sales. Just 14,349 units were made, making it rarer than the 78 and more raw in execution. This reboot Z28 saved Camaro performance from extinction. Today, it's gaining traction among collectors looking for affordable, unpolished muscle, especially in clean, unmolested condition. But as the Z28 roared back with graphics and attitude, the next Camaro tried a different approach, mixing luxury, stripes, and performance into one strange mid-decade experiment. Top 8, 1974, Camaro Z28 Type LT. By 1974, the muscle car was nearly extinct. Insurance hikes, emissions laws, and gas shortages were draining the soul from performance. But in a last-ditch effort to save face, Chevy gave the Camaro a strange double identity, part Z28, part Type LT. And it confused just about everyone. The 1974 Z28 still packed a respectable punch, a 350 cubic inch small block making 245 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque, paired with a 4-speed manual or automatic and optional 3.731 rear gears. It wasn't a street brawler anymore, but it could still crack 0 to 60 in around 6.7 seconds and quarter miles in the low 15s. The real curveball? Buyers could order the Z28 with the Type LT luxury package, turning a once-track Spodkind Camaro into a velvet-lined cruiser with extra insulation, wood grain dash trim, and plush interior upgrades. Outside, it featured a new federally mandated 5 miles per hour bumper, revised grille, and Z28 striping over a long hood and fastback profile. It looked aggressive, but softer. Of the 13,802 Z28S built in '74, a significant number were Type LT variants, blurring the line between performance and personal luxury. Purists hated it. Casual buyers loved it. Chevy had accidentally created a muscle car for people who didn't really want one. Today, the 1974 Z28 Type LT is one of the least understood Camaros of the decade, often dismissed, but quietly gaining respect for its oddball identity and end-of-an-era charm. But while the Type LT softened the Z28's punch, the next Camaro took a different route, reviving raw aggression with a new name and an unlikely engine badge. Top 9, 1973 Camaro, Z28, L82. The '73 Z28 marked the beginning of the end, or so most people thought. Emissions rules were tightening, insurance companies were circling, but deep inside the order sheets was a surprising option. The Corvette's high-performance L82 small block hidden in plain sight. The 1973 Camaro Z28 came standard with a 350 cubic inch V8 producing 245 horsepower and 280 pound-feet of torque, respectable in a year when muscle was fading. But select builds snuck in the L82 spec components from the Corvette line: higher compression, 9 cubes, forged crankshaft, 4 bolt mains, and a higher lift camshaft. Paired with a 4-speed manual and 3.73 rear gears, the L82-powered Z28 could run 0 to 60 in just 6.5 seconds and nail the quarter in the mid-14s, putting it right on pace with early 70s Mopar muscle still clinging to relevance. Styling-wise, the '73 Z28 wore a more refined look than its 70 to 72 siblings, featuring a new split bumper and wraparound rubber guards. Inside, it retained the no-nonsense dash layout and deep bucket sports seats. Chevrolet never officially advertised the Z28 as using the L82, though it shared almost every key spec. Only 11,574 Z28s were built in '73, and those with the higher-up components became street sleeper legends. Today, collectors hunt for the L82-equipped '73 Z28S like buried treasure. With proper documentation, they fetch a premium and blur the line between sports car precision and muscle brute force. But while the '73 played the sleeper card, the next Camaro wore no disguise. It was loud, proud, and ready to take on disco-era doubters in full late '70s regalia. Top 10, 1978 Camaro Z28. By 1978, muscle cars were a fading memory, replaced by decals, spoilers, and optimism. But one Camaro dared to make speed fashionable again. The Z28 was back, with a vengeance, and it didn't care what the purists thought. The 1978 Z28 returned as a full production model, not just an option package, bringing with it a redesigned front end, functional hood scoop, fender flares, and some of the loudest graphics of the decade. Under the hood was a 350 cubic inch small block V8, making 185 horsepower and 285 horsepower-feet of torque. Hardly fearsome, but with a 3.42 rear axle, 4-speed manual, and tighter F41 suspension, it moved with surprising urgency. Performance figures? 0 to 60 in 7.1 seconds, quarter mile in 15.5 tons. Not blistering, but enough to dust most performance cars of its era, including some surviving big blocks neutered by smog regs. Inside, the Z28 combined sport and comfort, high back bucket seats, full instrumentation, and optional air conditioning. It wasn't just a muscle car, it was a lifestyle. The real shock? The Z28 sold like wildfire. With 54,907 units built in 1978, it became one of the best-seller Z28s of all time, reviving the Camaro brand and proving that style and speed still had a market. Far from being a watered-down icon, the 1978 Z28 became the blueprint for the late '70s performance revival. It brought muscle back into pop culture and onto high school parking lots across America. Today, it stands as a time capsule of survival. A car that embraced excess, adapted to the times, and reminded the world, even in the age of disco, the Camaro still had fight left in its frame. These Camaros weren't born to pose, they were built to pounce. In an era of shrinking horsepower and rising insurance premiums, They found ways to stay lethal. Whether through high-revving small blocks or outlaw dealer mods, they proved one thing: the HEMI wasn't untouchable. And the bowtie boys? They had plenty of bite left when it counted.